was built, the dome of St. Paul's Cathedral remains one of London's greatest icons. Views of the monument are now protected by law. No new buildings are allowed to obscure it. But behind this familiar image is a revolutionary structure. This dome has a secret, inspired by pioneering scientific discoveries. It owes its existence to a catastrophe. Londoners feared that 1666, ending in the apocalyptic 666, would be a year full of dread. On the 2nd of September, a fire broke out in Thomas Farriner's bakery in Pudding Lane. A violent and unseasonal easterly gale fanned the blaze, and the fire ripped through the medieval timber buildings of London. The Great Fire burned for 4 days straight, destroying 13,000 houses and 93 churches. As the firestorm engulfed London's magnificent Gothic cathedral on Ludgate Hill, fears of an impending apocalypse intensified. St. Paul's was severely damaged, a huge loss to the city.
There'd been a cathedral on Ludgate Hill for 1,000 years before the Great Fire.
Author Leo Hollis has written extensively about the disaster. For him, St. Paul's was not just the most important church in the city, but also a focus of national pride.
It was one of the most extraordinary buildings of the age. It was certainly one of the largest buildings in Europe. It was the place for a celebration for military victories. It was the place where the king and the citizens would meet.
And this great building played a vital role in the daily lives of Londoners.
Well, Old St. Paul's was the focal point of Old London.
Historian Andrew Lacey says the cathedral wasn't simply a religious landmark.
It wasn't just a church, it was a place where people went to do business, to find a prostitute. There was a thriving book trade in St. Paul's churchyard. So it was very much a cultural hub rather than just a church.
Desperate to restore this city landmark, a royal commission of churchmen and city officials attempted to repair the cathedral. But the structure was a death trap. All efforts to salvage it came crashing down. There was no choice. As one of the world's most prominent cities, London needed a fitting cathedral as its centerpiece. In deciding who should design and oversee the building, the Royal Commission took a risk. It appointed an astronomer. His name was Christopher Wren.
It would seem very strange to us now that Wren, whose background was in astronomy and experimental science, should be chosen to design a building.
But as architectural historian James Campbell points out, professional architects didn't exist at that time.
In the 17th century, architecture was perceived as a branch of mathematics. And Wren, thought of as one of the leading mathematicians of the age, was thus a natural choice.
35-year-old Wren was one of a new breed of scientists unlocking the secrets of the universe. They established the Royal Society, which broke with tradition, basing its thinking on deductive logic, without influence from religion or philosophy. When he turned to St. Paul's, Wren also broke with architectural tradition. His pioneering designs caused conflict with his employers, delaying the start of construction until almost 9 years after the Great Fire. The first stone of the new cathedral was not laid until the 21st of June, 1675. But there was much more at stake than mere architecture. In an age of intense religious conflict, where the wounds of the English Civil War had barely healed, even the shape of a church held huge significance. In the previous 500 years, the church had favoured the Gothic style for the great cathedrals of England. But this was a problem for Wren.
Like most educated men of the 17th century, Wren would have considered Gothic architecture to be rather rude, rather barbarous. It was associated with the Middle Ages, a product of a less civilized time.
As a mathematician, Wren also disliked the odd shapes and proportions of Gothic architecture. He believed that only certain regular geometric shapes and mathematical symmetry could create true architectural beauty.
He describes two types of architectural beauty. The first is that of architectural style, architectural decoration. But the second one was more fundamental, and that was mathematical beauty. The proportions of a building, the division of it into cubes or spheres, which gave it its fundamental beauty.
For Christopher Wren, the classical buildings of ancient Greece and Rome embodied a superior geometric beauty to Gothic architecture. In Italy and France, Baroque architects also looked to classical architecture for inspiration. Wren was enthused by their designs and their domes, but his passion was not shared by his employers. The new architecture flourishing in Paris and Rome was sponsored by the Catholic Church. England's Protestant clergy, represented on the Royal Commission, was deeply hostile to Catholicism. To sell his classical vision to the Royal Commission, Wren gambled and commissioned a hugely expensive scale model of his design. But if he could not persuade the doubters, his dream of a classical cathedral would crumble before it was built. In an upper room of St. Paul's Cathedral stands a huge wooden model of the church. It is one of the most intricate architectural models of all time, and to build it would cost hundreds of thousands of pounds in today's money. For Leo Hollis, this so-called great model design was Wren's definitive vision of his new church.
This is the great model. In 1672, Wren came up with a brand new vision of what St. Paul's could be. Everyone could see Wren's vision. It was detailed and carved both inside and out. Reigning above the cathedral and above London itself was the dome, the heart of Wren's plans. This was his dream.
It was heavily inspired by recent French and Italian designs, such as St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, and it had support in high places. Even the current king, Charles II, is an enthusiastic supporter of Wren's design. But it wasn't the king's money that was to pay for the cathedral, and Wren's grand vision was about to suffer a serious setback. The Royal Commission was manned by Protestant churchmen, wary of any traces of Papist or Catholic influences. Wren's hugely innovative plan was a step too far for his employers.
The clergy didn't like it because it didn't look like a traditional English cathedral. Also, they probably thought that the building looked too foreign, and in the 17th century, to be accused of being foreign almost inevitably meant that you were a Papist as well. Traditionally, cathedrals have been built in parts. You start at the East End and build sections of your cathedral, which means you can get into the East End, the choir, and start holding services whilst the rest of the building is still a building site. And you can't do that with the great model design. It's a truly classical building which has to be built as a whole. It was a great blow to Wren. It's said that it's the only time he was seen to weep in public.
It was a devastating setback. But Wren persevered. Bowing to the Royal Commission's demands, he decided to play safe. He offered a more traditional design. Shaped like an elongated cross, it could be completed in stages, as the Commission required. It was a fudge of two different styles, a long way from Wren's original classical vision, but the Commission approved the plan and gave the design the royal warrant. Wren was able to start his building.
The warrant design was an unusual set of plans. He found himself having to compromise, to reconcile the differences between Gothic architecture and classical architecture. And you see it, the dome has been flattened out completely, and there is a strange, bizarre sort of spire that rises up through the center of the building.
For Wren, the success of this fudged design was a bittersweet victory. It was not the design he favored. Could he defy the Commission and go back to his original plan? He needed to make an immediate decision, because he had to lay the foundations for whichever of the designs he was going to build. Wren knew that without sound foundations, a huge building can lean dangerously.
When you look at the ground, actually, it looks like something firm that won't move, but that's a delusion.
Civil engineer Ed McCann explains how the lack of sound foundations can lead to catastrophic failure.
Actually, the ground is more like a mattress with an infinite number of variable stiffness springs. So if I push down hard in one place, I'll go down so much. If I push down hard in another place, I'll go down so much more. And when you put big, heavy buildings on top of this giant mattress, it's inclined to go down more or less in different parts. Now, clearly, that could be quite catastrophic for a building, because if that bit goes down a lot, that bit doesn't go down at all, we can get the situation where it breaks its back, or towers lean over too much, or buildings separate.
Wren knew his huge building would need a stable base. He had a difficult choice to make. He could save time and money if he built on the old foundations, which had already compressed the ground. But his new design was a different shape, and he would have to adapt it, which for Wren was out of the question. Wren decided to dig new foundations. The old foundations would have to be broken up. Any hard areas left behind might affect the cathedral's stability. He examined the ground and found layers of clay and sand. He decided to build on the clay, believing it would offer a more stable base than sand. Wren didn't yet know it, but his choice of foundations was to have dramatic consequences for his cathedral. Nearly 10 years after the Great Fire, the rebuilding began. Wren decided to tailor the cathedral plans to something close to the original great model. The warrant design, approved by the Commission, became architectural history. Wren's new plan was another compromise, using the great model as an inspiration, but like the warrant design, it could be built in stages. Making any changes to the warrant design was a gamble, but Wren believed he could create room for maneuver, and through a mix of cunning and proud defiance, he would build his cathedral. Keeping his plans under wraps would be difficult.